Hello friends, we're going to share this story called Owl Eyes today, and it's what we call a Native American creation story. It tells about how the great creator created all the animals that live on earth, and despite the interference by this owl. The Native American people told these stories to teach their children and members of their tribes about all the plants and animals, and to help them to learn the lessons that these animals and plants wanted to share, to help them to learn how to live on Mother Earth and have reverence for Mother Earth and all life on our planet. It's really fun to read these stories. They give us a deeper connection and understanding to our beautiful planet. And isn't it fun that you can use your creativity to write stories about how the Earth came to be too? We'll talk more about that later. I think it's very fun to use our imagination to create in that special way. So let's find out this story called Owl Eyes by Frieda Gates and Yoshi Miyake. It's kind of a fun story. Author's note: the Mohawk people's own name for themselves is Kanihaka, which means people of the place of the flint. Flint is a kind of stone. Mohawk comes from an Algonquin word, mohawag. The Algonquins and the Mohawks were great enemies, and the terms mean eaters of human flesh. Ooh. The Kanihaka are one of the 6 nations that make up the Haudenosaunee, who through the French became known as the Iroquois nation because the Algonquins called them real rattlesnakes. The Haudenosaunee made their homes in upper New York State. So these were tribes in the great Iroquois nations. Roweno, master of all spirits and everything maker, made the world and everything in it. Before he built the world's high mountains, before he created the wide deserts or the deep seas, he made the woodlands. Roweno filled the woodlands with wonderful plants, streams, and trees. When he was finished, he looked about and said, "This land is beautiful, but too quiet and still. I shall fill these woodlands with creatures to make movement and sound." He dug out great mounds of earth, moistened them with clear stream water, and began to shape the clay. These will be birds to sing and fly among the trees, and these animals to run and play on the ground. So remember, clay is part of soil, and it can be used to create dishes and objects because it holds water and form. Roweno molded many forms. He gave them small slitted eyes so they could see, and beaks or muzzles so they could smell and speak. He shaped wings that would someday fly and feet that would someday run. Roweno gave each of his creatures a name, but he did not finish any of them. He had worked long and hard, and now he wanted to rest. "I will leave you now," he said, "and while I am gone, you will sit and observe the place where you will live. When I return, each of you may choose your colors and however else you wish to be." So they get to have a choice in how they want to look and live their lives. A long time passed before Roweno came again to the woodlands, but at last he did return. Placing Fox on his large stone work table, Roweno asked, "How would you like to be?" Fox was very clear. "I want red fur, a black nose, and a tail that is long and bushy." Owl, sitting on the ground nearby, called out, "Fox should be yellow like the sun." Roweno ignored him. This is how the owl thinks the fox should look. I don't think he looks right. Sparrow was a small bird and wished to hide in the shadows, so Roweno began to color him speckled brown. He had finished Sparrow's body and was starting to work on the head when Owl cried, "Roweno, wait! Sparrow's beak is too small." Roweno continued to ignore Owl and went on with his work. So this is how Owl thinks Sparrow should look. He's not respecting the sparrow's wishes, is he? Roweno was fixing Squirrel's jaws, making them large enough to hold nuts when Owl spoke again. "Squirrel's ears should be longer." Roweno glared at Owl. Can you imagine Squirrel looking like that? Looks more like a rabbit to me. Just as Roweno had completed the last of Chipmunk's stripes, Owl called out, "Chipmunk shouldn't have stripes, Roweno. He should be covered with spots." Roweno scowled. "That owl is getting on my nerves," he grumbled. Look at him with spots. He looks pretty cute. But I like his racing stripes, don't you? Every time Roweno set to work, Owl had something to say. Wolf should have a smaller feet. Beaver's tail should be long and skinny. Mouse should be much bigger. Finally, Roweno could bear Owl's meddling no longer. He picked up the interfering bird, set him on the work table, and asked irritably, "How would you like to be?" Owl answered at once, "I want red feathers like cardinals." Lifting up his great hands toward the sky, Roweno was about to cover Owl with red feathers when Owl suddenly shouted, "No, not red, make them blue. Yes, that's what I want. I want blue feathers like the blue jays." Roweno glared at the bird and again raised his hands. But again Owl stopped him. "Wait! I don't want blue feathers either. Actually, I don't believe I should have feathers at all. I really should be covered with fur." "Stop!" growled Roweno, and he grabbed the irritating bird and hurled him onto a branch high up in the tree. "It's obvious that you don't know what you want, so you will sit in this tree until you do." Roweno turned back to his work and, picking up another unfinished creature, asked gently, "How would you like to be?" "I'd like a long neck and beautiful white feathers," said Swan. "I want a long neck too," Owl called from the top of the tree. "Be quiet," thundered Roweno, and reaching out one great arm, turned Owl around. "Now, you troublesome bird," Roweno said, "you will keep quiet. You will face the other way, and you will not watch me while I work." But Owl could not keep quiet. He could not stay turned away, and he could not stop watching Roweno work. He twisted and stretched until he was able to see. Roweno had barely started stretching Rabbit's ears before Owl spoke again. "Hey, Roweno! Hey, everything maker! You can finish me now. I've decided how I like to be." Roweno was not used to being disobeyed, and he roared, "What did you say? Are you speaking to me? I've decided to have a long neck, red feathers, a pointed beak, and a crown of plumes. I want you to make me into the most graceful, the fastest, the most beautiful of all birds." Roweno couldn't believe what he had heard. "Didn't I tell you to be quiet? Didn't I tell you to stay turned around and not to watch me while I work?" "Oh, but I know you didn't mean it," said the Owl. "Such impudence," said Roweno, and grabbing Owl, threw him onto the work table. He stuffed the bird's head deep into his body, yanked both ears so they stood straight up, and shook them so hard that Owl's eyes grew large with fright. Finally, Roweno dunked Owl in the mud, covering his feathers dull brown. "Now," said Roweno, "your neck is short enough so you will watch only what is in front of you, and your ears are open enough to hear what you are told when you are not to do. Your eyes are big enough to see in the dark, and your feathers are dull, for you will seldom be seen. And because I work only by day, you will be awake only at night." When Roweno let Owl go, the frightened bird spread his new wings and hooting, "Hoo, hoo, hoo, hoo," flew high into the distant woodlands. Now Roweno could work in peace. He finished all the rest of the woodland creatures, admired his work, and went off to create the rest of the world. As for the owl, to this day he makes his home deep inside the woodlands, where he sleeps all day, is awake all night, and is seldom seen. This is the great horned owl. Isn't he beautiful? But he got into a bit of trouble trying to boss around the maker of everything. I hope you enjoyed this story. I'm going to share other creation stories with you. It's a lot of fun to hear about the stories that have been told around the campfires by tribes over thousands of years. Thanks for joining me.